Well, the 25% auto tariffs are set to take effect in just 2 days, and our next guest warns that it will drive up used car prices, forcing consumers to look for even older vehicles in an already challenging rate environment.
I thought these tariffs were supposed to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. So tell me why Subaru just announced that they're leaving. Subaru's been building cars here for years in the U.S., years, and now they're leaving because of the 25% tariffs. Thanks, Donald. Great job.
Something big is unfolding in North America, and it's not making headlines the way it should. A name long tied to American driveways, road trips, and family memories is stepping away. Subaru, the Japanese automaker that once thrived on U.S. soil, has stopped building cars for Canadian buyers in America. The spark behind that decision? Tariffs that were supposed to revive American industry, but instead sent production packing. Now, as Washington digs in on trade battles, Japan's gaze is shifting toward a different partner, Canada. Ottawa is opening its doors to the industries of tomorrow, from clean energy to cutting-edge tech. So what does this quiet exodus say about the future of North America's economy? And how did Canada become the new destination for global power plays? Mark Carney's government didn't wait for Washington to find its footing. While U.S. politics turned inward, Canada began reshaping its place in the global economy. What Carney built was more than a trade partnership. It was the beginning of a geopolitical transformation. And when he walked onto that stage in Kuala Lumpur, the global balance of industry quietly began to lean north. When President Trump introduced his 25% tariffs on imported autos and metals, the promise was bold. Factories would roar back to life, jobs would return, and America would once again become the heart of manufacturing. But instead of sparking a renaissance, the move triggered a retreat. Companies that had long produced cars and parts in the United States started packing up and looking elsewhere. Subaru was the first to make it official, halting production for Canadian buyers in its American plants and moving those operations back to Japan. The math was simple. With steel and aluminum prices skyrocketing under new tariffs, manufacturing inside the U.S. became more expensive than importing finished vehicles. Subaru's decision sent a shock through the automotive corridor. Workers who had once built Outbacks for Canadian roads suddenly faced uncertainty about their future. While Washington blamed others and doubled down, investors saw a deeper trend taking shape. Economists began calling it reverse localization, the exact opposite of what Trump intended. Policies meant to bring manufacturing home were driving it away. Instead of strengthening American industry, they pushed global companies to relocate operations abroad. The auto sector, once the pride of America's post-war growth, was slowly turning into a casualty of political games. Across the border, Canada was watching and moving with quiet precision. Ottawa didn't retaliate with anger or noise. Instead, it positioned itself as the calm alternative. While Washington waged trade battles, Canada reached out to new partners. Behind the scenes, it started negotiating with Japan, Malaysia, and China, building bridges while the U.S. burned them. Subaru's shift was a signal of a deeper change. Other automakers followed the same path. Toyota, Hyundai, and China's electric vehicle giant BYD began redirecting their strategies north. The U.S. market, once considered a badge of prestige, was now weighed down by tariffs and constant political whiplash. In contrast, Canada's market looked like solid ground. Toyota's Canadian sales jumped nearly 30% in a single month. The difference came down to stability. Carney's government didn't lure companies with subsidies or grand promises. It offered something far more valuable: predictability. For global manufacturers, that consistency meant survival. They could plan long-term investments without fearing that a single political outburst would ruin their margins. In Washington, the focus on tariffs and trade wars made planning impossible. Every new announcement carried fresh uncertainty, leaving businesses guessing about what would come next. The results became visible almost immediately. On one side of the border, American factories slowed, their production lines growing quieter. On the other, Canadian ports grew busier as ships from Asia arrived carrying Japanese and Korean vehicles bound for showrooms across North America. The same models that once rolled out of assembly lines in Indiana were now being built overseas and imported north. What emerged was no coincidence. It was an organized exodus. Investors started calling it the Northern Shift. Each time the White House announced a new tariff, another partnership was signed in Ottawa. Yet most Americans didn't see the full picture. Many believed these moves were temporary or limited to a few companies. In truth, it was about something much larger. Who would shape the next era of industrial power in North America? Mark Carney understood that before anyone else. While the U.S. government used trade as a weapon, Carney turned stability itself into a strategy. He realized that in a world addicted to chaos, reliability could be a form of strength. His plan was straightforward: rebuild Canada's reputation as the partner the world could depend on. He spent months cultivating ties with Asia's biggest economies, not for headlines, but for long-term cooperation. Moreover, Carney's team developed what economists later named the Smart Trade Doctrine. It emphasized transparent rules, green manufacturing incentives, and open digital borders, everything global businesses craved after years of turbulence. Each agreement was designed to attract companies frustrated by Washington's unpredictability. While the U.S. government kept escalating its trade wars, Canada positioned itself as the modern alternative: open, secure, and future-focused. Carney's diplomacy wasn't flashy. There were no political rallies or televised boasts. His work was quiet and methodical, built on trust and timing. When Washington shut a door, Ottawa opened one wider. So when Japan began reevaluating its automotive partnerships under pressure from tariffs, Carney saw the opportunity. Instead of demanding loyalty, he offered cooperation. He talked about clean energy, data sharing, and innovation. He treated Japan not as a rival, but as a partner in progress. That shift reshaped more than trade. It redefined alliances. For decades, Japan's auto industry had been intertwined with American demand. But as Trump's tariffs made that dependence risky, Japan started looking for a new route into the Western market. Canada emerged as that route. The two nations began aligning on clean technology, open market access, and innovation. Subaru's withdrawal from U.S. production was the first sign of a larger pivot. Japanese automakers started using Canadian ports to reach North America, effectively bypassing the U.S. altogether. Carney's government made it even easier by lowering tariffs and streamlining cross-border logistics. For Japan, it was a way to keep access to Western consumers without facing American political uncertainty. For Canada, it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to become the new bridge between Asia and the West. The symbolism was hard to miss. Japan wasn't abandoning the United States out of hostility. It was choosing predictability over volatility. And Canada wasn't pleading for attention. It was being invited into leadership. What began as a strategy for survival had become the blueprint for a new economic order. When Mark Carney arrived in Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN summit, few expected anything groundbreaking. But what unfolded there changed everything. Standing before representatives from Japan, Malaysia, China, and Indonesia, Carney delivered more than a policy speech. He made a declaration of independence. Calm and deliberate, he told the world, "We'll have discussions with the United States when they're ready, but we're not sitting still." That sentence carried weight. It was more than diplomatic phrasing. It was a statement of direction. For decades, Canada had followed America's lead, shaping its policies around its southern neighbor. That day, the script flipped. Carney made it clear that Canada was ready to lead on its own terms. And within hours of that announcement, Ottawa proved it. New trade frameworks were signed with Japan, Malaysia, and China, covering clean energy, artificial intelligence, and electric vehicle production. These weren't ceremonial gestures, they were deals worth billions, designed to lay the foundation for the next decade of industry. While the U.S. government built walls around its economy, Canada was building networks across continents. Carney's message echoed through every capital in Asia. In a world where uncertainty had become the norm, he was offering something rare: stability. Analysts called it the Carney Doctrine. Economists dubbed it the Asian Turn. But for ordinary Canadians, it was something simpler: proof that steady leadership could still win. While the U.S. tweeted threats and warnings, Canada quietly signed agreements. While Washington isolated itself behind trade barriers, Ottawa opened new doors. By the end of the summit, one thing had become unmistakable. The world was no longer waiting for America to lead. It was turning toward Canada instead. The results came fast. Within months of the Kuala Lumpur summit, Japan's biggest automakers rerouted their shipping networks north. Subaru, Toyota, and Mazda began moving their North American logistics through Canadian ports, bypassing U.S. customs entirely. BYD, China's leading electric vehicle producer, announced new distribution centers in Quebec and British Columbia. Canada was no longer a background player. It had become the primary gateway connecting Asia's factories to North America's consumers. Vancouver replaced Los Angeles as the preferred port for EV imports, and Montreal evolved into a hub for advanced battery technology. In Ontario, Japanese investors poured billions into new manufacturing plants focused on clean energy vehicles and sustainable production. While Washington debated tariffs and political points, Ottawa offered something far more valuable: clarity. Carney's administration streamlined customs procedures, expanded tax incentives for green industries, and invited cross-border research collaborations. For automakers frustrated with uncertainty, Canada was becoming the stable launchpad into the Western market. Every shipment from Tokyo, Nagoya, or Seoul now found its route through Canadian soil. While Canada moved forward, the United States struggled under the weight of its own economic design. The policies meant to restore manufacturing had started breaking it apart. Canada no longer lived in its neighbor's shadow. It stood in its own light, confident and composed. Every factory opening, every trade alliance, and every investment made that truth stronger. North America's center of gravity had shifted. The industries shaping the future, automotive, clean energy, and advanced technology, were no longer confined by old borders or policies built on threats. They were being built in places that valued collaboration and trust. That's all for today. Subscribe for more, and we will see you in the next one.